Members and supporters of South Bunbury Footy Club. It's Trevor Nisbett here. I'm got the wonderful opportunity to speak to Terry House about his involvement in the football club and his journey since 1962 with South Bunbury. Terry played 150 games for the club. So many achievements. It's unbelievable. I'll let him talk a little bit about those, but certainly a premiership player with South in 68 and 71 and captain coach in 73, South Bunbury fairest and best in 72 and 73, Pike medal for best on ground in 1972 against Collie, two-time Hayward medalist and five-time league premiership coach with Harvey Brunswick and with Busselton. Southwest Footballer of the Year in 1973. And Terry's been involved with country footy for well over 20 years and was president for 10 years of the Country Footy League. And I've been fortunate enough to see Terry on so many occasions where he's been unbelievable for football in this state. Welcome, Terry. Great to have you here, mate, and it's great that you can have a chat with the South Faithful. Give us a little bit of background to you getting to play with South Bunbury.
Well, I really couldn't have gone anywhere else, Nezzy, being a descendant of the Dillon clan, so it was South Bunbury or bust. And I lived only at the other side of the hill from the ground here, and so it was just a natural progression to get to South Bunbury.
With sport, with Sport Buswell, you formed a bit of an allegiance coming down to watch training and other things. Was that all part of the plan to eventually get to? Because you were both pretty young, weren't you?
Yeah, we've been knocking around. We've been best mates for as long as I can remember, and we couldn't get a game because there was no juniors back in those days. And we'll talk about juniors a little bit later on, but there was school football or there was under 18s. And when we got old enough to play under 18s, Sport and I couldn't get a regular game. We were always 19th or 20th man. But we stuck with the club because we loved footy, and so we just hung around.
Yeah, well, no interchange in those days. You just got to wait for someone to get hurt or someone to favour you, I guess.
You get 5 minutes in the last quarter to go and do your best.
Well, at 15 or 16, I suppose that's what you can put up with that, but then you get going. During your career at South, you obviously had a number of coaches, but does one stand out? And would you like to comment on the coaches who've coached you?
Yeah, there was certainly one that stood out, and he was responsible for me playing the type of football that I eventually played, and that was Phil Farrell. He came to the club and he encouraged me to run as far as I could in a game, so up and down the ground. I was playing on a wing in those days, and South around about that time had a player called Doug Cunningham, who came down from East Perth, and he was a sports writer, and he ultimately went back to Perth and worked for the Daily News, and I think he was their chief sports writer. But I used to watch closely the way Doug played, and I copied my game on him, and it all sort of fell into place beyond that.
Over your career at South, and you'll have opposition players that you admired as well, but I guess some of the teammates first of all, that you played with who you really admired?
Well, I've often been asked about who's the best player I've seen or played on, or I prefer not to classify them that way. I would say most valuable player. And in that category, I've got no doubt in my mind that Gary Buswell was the most valuable player. He 5'10" at the best. He played as a ruckman, centre, forward, full forward, anywhere you wanted to put him. Over his career, I don't know that he ever won a fairest and best, but he was certainly the most appreciated player that I played with in my playing days. As far as opposition go, there was a number of great players, of course. Keith Bedford from Donnybrook, who incidentally started his football at South Bunbury. Bill Hayward from the Collie Football Club, never played a bad game. Later on, a player that was about as good as there has been in this competition, Graham Jeffries out at Harvey Brunswick, a little fellow that played in the centre, won a couple of Hayward medals, about half a dozen or more, best and fairest at Harvey Brunswick. He was just an outstanding player, but you know, there's been so many real good ones, and to pick a couple out is probably unfair on a lot of other people.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when you've got so many good players that you're playing with, and then you're trying to measure them up against opposition players. It's a difficult chore, isn't it? You know.
Oh, it certainly is. Look, back in my playing days at South Bunbury, and as I said, Sport played as a ruckman at 5'10". Jock Constantine was our number one ruckman, and he would have been battling to be 6 foot. And they just did a terrific job. You know, week after week they got hammered, but they just kept going. And you know, the spirit of the club was built around players of that ilk.
You know, your career, I mentioned it earlier, is just illustrious, and you've done a fantastic job over your footy career. But then you turn your hand to coaching. How difficult was it being captain coach and taking on that role, as well as you know, trying to get the other players motivated while you're out there?
Yeah, well, my first senior coaching job was South Bunbury in 1973. It was, you know, I've always been one of the boys, and then all of a sudden I was the captain coach, and to try and get my message across, I had to sort of edge away from the friendship side of things, and I don't think that went down too well with some of them, but it was what I thought was necessary at the time, so it was pretty difficult. At the end of 73, I was no longer required as a coach, so if you want to talk about that, I'll carry on with that. So I'd been told to reapply for the coaching position for 1974 if I wanted to. And I knew that the club had been in touch with Merv Kennedy, so I knew there was no point in me applying for the position because it had already been sorted. So there were some difficult times because I was working for a certain person at the time, and I went to him and said, look, Merv's coming back, and he said, look, I implore you not to play football. So, but that night I got a call from Harvey Brunswick. A fellow called Neville Pinner rang up and said, oh, I hear that they're going to give Merv Kennedy the coaching job. Do you want to talk to us about coming out here?
And you obviously still wanted to coach.
I still, well,
I was just started.
You know, I was not broken-hearted that I wasn't going to be coaching South Bunbury, because I'd done something that I probably never expected that I would do. But all of a sudden, I had another opportunity. So the next day after that phone call, I went to work and I said to the boss, look, this is what happened. He said, look, I don't employ you to play football, so if you want to take that job, take it. So I was still unsure of what I wanted to do. So anyway, later on that same night, after I'd spoken to the boss, I got a call from Sid Armstrong. And he said, if you take the coaching job out at Brunswick, you're going to get sacked from your job. And I said, oh, no, I've spoken. I won't mention the names, but I've spoken to the boss, and he said, such and such. And he said, I'm telling you as a friend. So I got my backup, as I used to do, as I still do. So I got another call from Harvey Brunswick, and I said, yeah, I'll meet with you. So anyhow, that's how it happened. So I went out to Harvey Brunswick. But I'd sort of learned a heck of a lot in my first year as coach in 73, and then I went out to a completely strange group of players. So it wasn't as difficult for me, and I could be their friend and their coach, and there was no real ties there. So that all sort of went okay then, and away we went. Yeah,
well, you're very successful because you've won the premiership in 74 and 75.
74 and 5, yeah. But we had terrific players. Honestly, you know, I could rattle off 50 players over those 2 years, and I wouldn't be exaggerating. They were just, you know, players like Lindsay Carroll that came down from Perth. You know, a state player, Eddie Wallazek, John Angel, the Italiano brothers. There were so many just very, very good players. So, you know, it all fell into place for us out there, and their time was right.
Yeah. Well, it's a fabulous performance. I mean, it's a difficult job coaching, let alone trying to play as well, and then moving clubs. But, you know, back to South, you must be really proud of what the club's been able to do with this building, where we're sitting at today, and the club rooms, the volunteers and the people are involved in the place.
Well, the club rooms is another story, but when you talk about club rooms, the old building that they've just demolished next door was our club rooms, and there was a group of us, Sport Buswell, Tommy Trigwell, Brian Cunningham, myself, John Depiazzi. We would meet there summer and winter. In the winter when it wasn't our training night, during the summer we'd just meet there after work and just talk. And but in the winter, we'd always train Monday, Wednesday and Friday, but Tuesday and Thursday was shared between Kerry Park and Bunbury. So we'd still come here and we'd go and watch them train for a while, and then we'd go and stand in the showers. And we'd stand in the showers till the showers went cold. So then we'd get the scream from next door, "You bloody South Bunbury bastards, you use all the hot water." So that was our home away from home. And then this club was born, and it was built basically on volunteer labour. You know, the players used to come here and cart sand, dig trenches, cart bricks, mix cement, do all sorts of things to help build the club. So in the end, when it was officially opened, it was just a feeling of great pride that the club had come from out of the old change rooms and into a beautiful building like it was in the time. And it still is. And still is, and they've just refreshed it, which is great.
Yeah, it's fabulous, isn't it? You know, it really is. Just a couple of insights, maybe on who you thought were the great characters in your time around the footy club.
Well, there were some. There's no doubt about that. But look, I'll tell you one story. We had this fellow that was part and parcel of South Bunbury. His name was Bob Donovan, Dr. Bob. And I don't know whether anyone else has told you this story, but he used to get around with Mel Cowdery, who was another character. And Mel Cowdery had a truck, and Bob would go with him in the truck. And Mel Cowdery was his coach. And he would coach Bob Donovan to do kookaburra calls for 5 or 6 lamp poles in duration along the side of the road. And so they'd be driving along and Bob would be going, "Cuckoo, cuckoo, cuckoo." And Cowdery would be saying, keep going. And so anyway, you remember we used to have at the end of the year a legacy game where they'd have pick a dozen or so local players and bring across half a dozen Victorians.
Yeah.
Well, after training one night, we were in the change room, in the old change room down below, and there was Len Thompson and Wayne Richardson, who was the captain of Collingwood at the time, Lee Matthews, some of the all-time greats. So Melly Crowd said, quiet everyone, quiet, I've got a special guest for you. So Bob Donovan hops up on the little bench where we used to sit, and he immediately calls for quiet, and Cowdery said, "Not yet, Bob, not yet." So he's standing there, and then Cowdery said, "Okay, kookaburra." So away he goes, and these fellas would stand there looking at him like, "Is he for real?" Then he says, "And I've got another one. What's this one?" He's going, "Sss, sss," and everyone's looking at him. He said, "The black snake, Dooper." And these fellas were just in stitches laughing, and it was one of the funniest times I've ever had. And we all made sport. We were just rolling around with laughter. It was as funny as
national game of footy.
Funny as hell, yeah.
Well,
Trev, you asked me about the coaching and how I got to South Bunbury and all that sort of thing. But my coaching actually started, you might remember, back with South Bunbury Whites in the under-14s.
Mm.
And that was about the start of junior footy, and your granddad and your dad had a major hand in that, in developing those juniors. George Hay was the one that threw the idea out there, and your granddad and dad, they took up with it, and away it all went. But we had, in those 14s, we had some great players, including yourself, of course, Rossi Marr, Peter Upson, Banger. I think Mark Harris was part of it.
Yes, he was,
Peter Bowles might have been part of it. He was around it at the time. There were some terrific players that stuck with it. with the Tigers and come up and played a lot of senior footy and won premierships in the seniors.
Yeah, look, it's a wonderful time, and let me tell you, you were a pretty good football coach. Get us all up and going at the one time, and we had some characters in that team as well.
I seem to remember that the grand final that day was a wet, rainy day.
Yeah.
And part of what I asked for the boys, if you couldn't pick it up, just soccer it, keep soccering it. And we won the grand final, which was one of the thrill on those little, when I say little, on your faces of you young kids back in those days was just sensational. So that's where I got my taste for coaching. And
yeah, absolutely. And you've got to start somewhere, don't you? You know, I think it was one of those eras where a lot of the senior players at South were actually coaching teams.
That's right.
Yeah, and you all put in an enormous amount of time back into the juniors.
And I always used to try and encourage the players when I was coaching to go back and coach juniors. You don't see it anymore. You know, I can't think of any senior players that go and coach kids.
Well, you know, from your experience and certainly my experience and what I've seen, you must learn more, you know, if you've coached, but even before you play.
Yeah.
You know, as soon as you coach, you're thinking, gee whiz, I didn't do that myself.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah.
That's right.
No, but it was fabulous of you to do that and start with the 14s. It was a great year. We talked about you leaving South, but you made a really successful coaching career post playing, and you're a wonderful footballer. What about post everything with your involvement with the Country Footy League? Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, I spent 20 years with the Country Football League, and I enjoyed every moment of it. And I think you mentioned early on, the last 10 years I was the president. It was just a wonderful experience, and we had some great times involved with the leaders of all the leagues around Western Australia. I think there's 24 leagues, so we were basically in charge of that. And then we had our combined sides. Our state sides, we used to have back. It doesn't happen anymore. The AFL decided in their wisdom to do away with the Australian Carnival, the Australian Country Carnival, which was an absolute disgrace. And I tried to get a meeting with the president at the time, what's his name, Richard Goyder. He agreed to meet with us because I was then also the vice president of the Australian Country Football Council. Yeah. So we arranged a meeting with Goyder, and the day of the meeting we were in Melbourne for the meeting, and we got a phone call from his secretary saying he can't meet you. So he wouldn't even meet us to discuss reinstating the carnival, which was terribly disappointing. But you know, the whole thing about the Country Football League is fantastic. You know, you don't realise how much work is done by volunteers all around the state, including that board. All volunteers, and they come from Geraldton. We've had them come from up in the Pilbara, right up north, right down from Albany, from all around the state on once a month occasion to come to those meetings, all at their own cost, and it was just fantastic. I don't know how it goes these days. I've been out of the scene now for 4 or 5 years, and I know they're having a few changes of seats there lately, so I don't know how it's all going now.
Yeah, well, my guess is it's still onwards and upwards. It's always been a challenge, and one of the great things you've been able to do is accept the challenge, like you always have with your footy career. But if you don't actually get involved in the running of country footy, there's potential there for it to die off really rapidly if you don't have those volunteers.
Oh, absolutely.
Putting in and week out.
Absolutely. Look, it's probably not known in areas like the southwest and some of the stronger areas, but country football is in real trouble. Every year we're losing a team out of a competition, which ultimately ends up with that competition. Some competitions have got 4 teams, you know, and you lose a team out of that, you haven't got a competition anymore. So you get a whole league joins another league, and it's a population shift. You know, we're all aware of that the farmers sell up and they move to a coastal town, and that the kids they don't want to farm anymore, so they sell to their neighbour. So it's just a shrinking thing, and it's just very, very up in the central wheat belt. Teams like Beacon, Muckenbudden, Corder. Beacon, I think, have got about 4 local players. That's it, and they've got to bring all their players from everywhere else on the weekend to play. But how fantastic that they can actually have the stomach to keep pushing and keep a team alive, believing that if football dies in the town will die. And that's not far wrong.
Well, it's just fabulous, the amount of time and effort you put in, Terry, you know, with the Country Footy League, because if we don't have people like you doing that, it doesn't keep going. It fades really rapidly. So well done. I guess the last thing, I mean, your football career has been unbelievable and outstanding. Your coaching career the same. You've done everything in footy, and particularly in country footy. But the South Bunbury Football Club members and supporters, you know, have you got anything else you'd like to say to them about, you know, your involvement with South?
Well, look, I enjoyed my time here, and I actually had a second stint back here. Coached for another 3 years. We weren't able to win a premiership, but that's okay. Yeah. The odd time I do come to the club, very few recognisable people, and what I would say to the people, to the members and supporters of the club, is get behind the club, because as successful as this club has been and probably will continue to be, they need supporters, they need members, they need volunteers. So stick with your club. If you're asked to do something, do it. Put a hand in and actually be involved in what goes on in the club. And that'll keep the club going. And that applies to not just this club, but every club that's around the place.
Yeah, great words. And certainly, hopefully, everyone at South understands that, because otherwise you don't have a great football club. And this club's been unbelievable.
Yeah.
For all of us. Yeah. Congratulations, mate. You're a real champ.
Okay,
thanks Terry.
Good, mate.
Tiger's name. Hear the barricades shouting as we stand up left and